SDG16 Plus, which is coordinated by IDLO. So, Ms. Mutoni, how can legal empowerment and community-based dispute resolution mechanisms dramatically scale up access to justice and benefit local communities? And what recommendations does civil society have to share? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. So we have been talking a lot about institutions today, and I just want to pivot a little bit to what is the reality for communities on the ground. And often when we talk about access to justice, we tend to imagine the formal system. We think courts, we think judges, lawyers, prosecutors. But when you look at where people actually go when they have a legal problem, the picture is very different. The reality on the ground, and research has consistently backed this up, is that most people search for justice in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, and other parts of the world. The search does not begin in a courtroom. They seek assistance from the paralegals in their village, from community elders, from local mediators, and other customary and informal structures, because these structures are accessible, they are affordable, and they are trusted. And they also play a critical role in community legal empowerment. And I want us to understand in this room that when we talk about legal empowerment, it's not some abstract concept. It is really about giving ordinary people the skills, the knowledge, and the support they need to understand, use, and shape the laws that affect their lives. And you might wonder, how does this actually work? And so, first and foremost, it educates. A community paralegal will tell people what the law says and what it means for them, that their land cannot be taken away without due process, that a detained person has to appear before a judge in a certain amount of time, that a woman has inheritance rights, that there is a legal aid office where they can get support. And for millions of people, this is information that they have never had access to, not necessarily because it's hidden, but because nobody has brought it to them in a way that they can understand and use. And of course, you cannot claim a right that you do not know. Second is that legal empowerment approaches meet people where they are. A court is in a city. A paralegal is in your village. A court will speak the language of the law. A local mediator will speak your language literally. So community-based dispute resolution mechanisms are accessible geographically, culturally, and linguistically. And of course, they reach people that the formal justice system often overlooks. Think about internally displaced person. Think about undocumented migrants. Think about women in contexts where appearing before male authorities is not an option. And third, legal empowerment approaches, they save time and they save money. For example, a land dispute in a formal court can take years to resolve, but a community-based paralegal can resolve this within days, and that land will immediately be back in use. And of course, we know that these mechanisms, they don't cost money. You don't have to pay court fees. You don't have to pay transport to go to a city far away to find a legal aid service provider. And there's no wages lost because you have had to take time off work. And these are the reasons that most people never or are discouraged to pursue justice. And community-based dispute resolution mechanisms, they remove these barriers entirely. And I would like to stress that these mechanisms actually complement the formal justice system, because we know that courts are overwhelmed, correctional detention facilities are overcrowded, judges are stretched thin, and these community-based actors, they are resolving disputes long before they have to reach the formal court system. If I can give an example from the Legal Aid Forum, just last year, our paralegals handled 8,000 cases. These are disputes that never had to reach the court. And so when it comes to recommendations from civil society organizations, we now all know that yesterday in this very building, we launched the 2026 Civil Society Declaration on SDG16. And in it, we make the case that justice should be financed as the public good that it is. The evidence is there, the frameworks are there. What has been missing is the political will to fund them. And for example, the Justice Financing Framework, which is commissioned by the Justice Action Coalition and drew lessons from the health sector. They show us what it actually would cost to deliver universal community-centered justice. And it turns out it's $35 per person in lower income countries. Just think about that, $35. This is less than primary health care. This is less than primary education, which we have both agreed that as a global community, they're worth the investment. We have trained the teachers, we have trained the nurses, we have built the infrastructure. We have not done this for justice. We need to ask ourselves why, and we need to fix it now. Thank you. Very much. I would like to close by highlighting two recommendations from the Civil Society Declaration that we've been talking about. One, to governments, recognize community-based and informal justice mechanisms in your national laws and policies. Martin made a good point earlier, saying that legal frameworks are the foundation of enabling environments. So recognize these mechanisms and allocate domestic budgets, not just donor funding. And to the donors, the research is there, the organizations doing the work are there, the frameworks are there. Fund them, and not on short-term project cycles, but through the kind of multi-year flexible core funding that actually allows for scale, learning, and sustainability. And I want to say that justice has always been underfunded, which has made no sense because it is the bedrock for rule of law and democracy and everything we've been talking about. But over the past few years, and last year especially, we have seen funding go significantly down for key actors like grassroots justice organizations and legal aid providers, and multiple of them have had to close their organizations. Those who didn't close had to scale back significantly on operations and the critical work that they're doing. So there really is no better time than now to recommit to meaningfully supporting this work, because the mechanisms I mentioned earlier, they are cost-effective, they are scalable, but they still require funding. And this is why we're asking you all today to stand with civil society and stand up for SDG16. Thank you.
Thank you.
Given the trend of shrinking civic space and funding challenges for civil society today that I think we've also heard about in previous panels, how can participation and meaningful inclusion of civil society in governance and SDG implementation be strengthened through action on SDG 16? So, Mr. Ur-Rehman, you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed for having me here. Since I represent Asia Development Alliance, which is the alliance of almost 33 national platforms and 12,000 grassroots level civil society organization. So my perspective would be based upon the aspirations of the community that I represent. When I will be talking about the civic space and the challenges, I will give you some of the perspective which could be a little different. Today, we live in a world where less than 20% population lives under the democracy. And like less than 20% of the world is enjoying rightful spaces and choices of life, whereas 80%, more than 80%, do not have that. The reason is that we do not have this liberty of actually enjoying this facility and having a public discourse on democracy, fundamental freedoms, and human rights in most of the global majority countries. And because of that, the civil society actually doesn't have that ability because of the lack of the civic spaces and lack of the civic infrastructure that we do not have because of the democratic challenges in our countries. And when I talk about civic infrastructure, it means the parliaments. In our previous session, we had this opportunity to listen from the president of the Interparliamentary Union, and he was talking about the importance of the parliament. The parliaments are really very important when they are the true representatives of the people. Unfortunately, in most of our global majority countries, and in some of the global northern countries, we see that the parliaments are under corporate capture. The judiciary is subservient to the executives. The media is compromised. And therefore, there is nobody to speak for the rights of the civil society. And we see that there's a growing challenges for the civic rights and spaces in our countries. And that was why we face the challenges of raising voices for the rights of the people. And hence, the civil society organizations having these quite stringent regulatory frameworks which are introduced by those parliaments. The national commissions on the human rights are not independent as it should be under the Paris Agreement. But most of the national human rights commissions, national commissions on the status of women, national commissions for the rights of children, they are under-resourced. They lack the human resource, and they also lack the financial support from the executives. And that was why they are not supporting the kind of discourse that civil society has been promoting for the rights of the people at large. So when we talk about the SDG16, most of the SDG16 targets are related to fundamental freedoms, human rights, inclusive societies, supporting the local agendas. But those targets are really not being accounted for, because at the national level, what we see is that the indicators related to the SDG16s are not being measured appropriately. This is quite unfortunate. Why they are not being measured appropriately, not only by the states, but also by the civil society organizations. The states do not have that capacity, and they actually do not want to measure those indicators because they lack the implementation over those indicators. But they don't allow civil society organizations because they want that, they think that the civil society is bringing a kind of challenge for the state authorities, highlighting the progress which is not appropriate at all. So this is another challenge. In most of the countries, what we have seen is that the local governance is not active. And where there is a local government is not active, in fact, what happens is that the localization of the SDG16 and particularly the indicators which are directly related to the communal rule of law and justice, they are not being implemented appropriately. So these are some of the challenges. when we see the financing, unfortunately, we see that at the broader perspective, the ODA is being cut, and we have noticed that very recently, 24% of the bilateral funding is being cut in the very recent time, and the 12.7% of the multilateral funding is being cut. And when it comes to the local civil society organizations, we see that the most of the funding, which is very much related to the human rights-based organizations, those who are working on rights-based agendas, the funding is not reaching to them. So that's why we actually have these challenges of implementing SDG16 targets at the grassroots level. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ur-Rehman. Speaker from the audience, and that is TAP Network. You have the floor.
Thank you all for your insights. Both throughout the day today and also yesterday during the SDG16 Civil Society Forum made possible by the Permanent Mission of Italy, IDLO, and UNDESA. As we have heard, the compounding challenges the world is currently facing are inextricably interconnected. And therefore, solutions need to reflect the complex and tangible nature of these realities. The 5 interconnected priorities of the Civil Society Declaration, highlighting the necessary steps to combat rising authoritarianism, growing mistrust in institutions, threats to media freedoms, the reduction in civil society space, and rollbacks on human rights commitments and their funding. The importance of highlighting organizations run by marginalized communities, especially women and girls, people with disabilities, indigenous populations, and youth-led movements, cannot be overstated, as these are the groups disproportionately impacted by rising conflicts, lack of access to justice, and the climate crisis. That being said, including frontline rights defenders and peace builders in international dialogues and change-making initiatives is not necessarily easy or convenient, but requires understanding of organizational needs and capacities and adjusting the expectations that civil society functions must fit and conform to complex and cumbersome processes and applications for participation. We're fortunate that this conference has provided us with the opportunity to bring so many members of civil society together with you all in meaningful dialogue. But I do want to acknowledge that many of our colleagues have not been able to participate due to exorbitant and prohibitive costs and issues accessing visas for travel. While they cannot be here with us today, they continue to do the vital work of implementing SDG16 in their contexts. And so for the question, I asked how can governments and civil society institute dynamic approaches to civil society inclusion that are not simply rooted in checking boxes, but ensure that even as political and funding tides shift, possibilities for advancing human rights remain. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the TAP Network also for posing a question to our panelists. And thank you so much for that message. And I now give the floor to Mr. Zia Ur-Rehman, who is last but certainly not least.
Thank you very much. Yeah, in the current context of shrinking civic spaces, declining development financing, and weakening trust in the institutions, participation and meaningful inclusion of civil society must be strengthened through a renewed commitment to SDG 16+. The 2026 Civil Society Declaration on SDG 16 reminds us that peaceful, just, and inclusive societies cannot be achieved without those working on the front lines, local peace builders, human rights defenders, grassroots organizations, legal aid providers, women leaders, youth groups, and communities affected by inequality and injustice. SDG 16+ provides a practical framework to move civil society participation from token consultations to structured, protected, and financed with continued, sustained, and meaningful engagement. This requires governments to protect civic space, review restrictive laws, ensure access to information, safeguard fundamental freedoms, and create formal mechanisms for civil society participation in SDG planning, budgeting, implementation, and review processes. Meaningful inclusion also requires financing. Civil society cannot contribute effectively to SDG implementation without flexible, long-term, sustainable, and core support, especially for local grassroots, women-led, youth-led organizations. Donors and the governments must invest in civic space protection, legal aid, digital security, organizational resilience, community-led monitoring, and independent civil society reporting. I thank you.